before you get started painting with watercolor, you probably want to go ahead and sketch out what you're going to be painting. So for this piece of fruit, I like to look at a reference image. So this is the reference image that I'm looking at. I kind of pre-drew this already, but when you draw that, I'm just drawing that kind of basic outline of it. And then I like to go ahead, so I have my, I draw very, very lightly because watercolor's translucent. And so you want to make sure that you're not drawing too dark because you can't erase it if watercolor goes over the top of it. So I just really lightly draw the outline. And then I also want to pay attention to where those highlight shapes are. Here, there's a highlight shape here, here. There's kind of an orangish shape here. I just want to pay attention to that. So there's a couple things to pay attention to when you're working with watercolor, or really most paintings, but especially watercolor. It's about layering and starting with the lighter color because you can always layer on top of it. You want to pay attention to details, shapes of highlights, and shadows. That has to do with the details and shapes of highlights and shadows. Pay attention to those edges of those shadows and highlights. Are they sharp or are they blended? The amount of water, how, often less is more. And then also analogous shading. I always try to stay away from black as much as possible because it's very, very overpowering. To get started, I'm going to kind of start with kind of that yellowy orangey color. I'm going to use my palette here for blending. Kind of a yellow, a little bit of orange. A little bit of water because I want it to be kind of pale, and I'm going to start painting kind of the very top first. Sometimes when I draw this picture that I'm drawing, I will go back and erase a little bit more even. Kind of just filling this in with that kind of yellowy orangey color. I also want to add a little bit more orange to this and then start painting in kind of that orangey color down here. And there's a lot of parts of the apple that have kind of an undertone of orange. It's kind of a light kind of color. Add a little bit of water to that to get that kind of pale orangey color, and I'm kind of going to put that over the whole thing because I'm going to layer, because again, it's about layering. I'm going to avoid those really, really light spots that I tell, those highlights. So there's one I kind of circled around. There's another one over here. I'm going to circle around it. But I'm going to fill in most of this with the orange. Okay, so as you can see, it's real pale. Kind of orange colored, where I'm avoiding those light spots. Then I want to get a little bit darker, so now I'm kind of working on the red. So I'm going to get some red and mix that in with this a little bit for my next color up. Pay attention to those details like texture too. And if you see some lines or things in there, see if you can work on trying to paint in, with that shape in mind. And they got a little bit dark here, but if I'm paying attention to this, that shadow shape at this apple, if you take a look again, it's kind of got that dark spot in the middle. It's okay that that's there. I got kind of dark right away. It's okay because it's going to be a dark spot. Leaving some textural spots where they exist and working my way around it. I'm gonna get a little bit more red and on here. I don't really use a whole lot of water when I'm working with this. I have to use water because it's watercolor, but I do try to pay attention to how much I'm actually using, because a little goes a long way, I find. And I tend to work a little bit more textural. It's not right or wrong way to necessarily create or do art. So you kind of have to find what style works best for you. This is just how you get that kind of layered texture look. If you're using analogous shading, I don't want to add black to that. It really isn't black on it. It really has kind of a purpley tone, like a reddish purple. So I'm gonna just start to add a little bit of purple into this color that I'm mixing into my red. And that's gonna get me a richer red color at first, and then it's gonna get me those really dark purple tones that are kind of creating the shadow shapes in that picture, in that image. Again, I'm kind of keeping some of that texture. If you find you're using a lot of water, you might have to kind of stop and let it dry. But if you're not, I don't tend to use a lot of water. I can kind of work a little bit quicker. Notice I've just kind of avoided where the stem is and where the leaf is. I will come back to that. Any extra particular dark shadow shapes, I'm gonna make sure they're in there. One thing I also like to do is kind of come back and double check any of those highlight shapes. I'm kind of coming back and adding a little bit more reddish in here because I'm losing that kind of red color. Again, this is the best part about watercolor, is that it's about layering. So I can come back and add some more of this reddish color on top of this, and I'm not going to lose that texture that I worked really hard to build up by just getting this a little bit more red, rich apple color in some spots. Another thing this does do is it kind of smooths some of the stuff that I want to smooth. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is come back and just double check on those with just kind of a clean brush with water on it, just a little bit of water. I want to kind of just smooth some areas and like take out some pigment on some stuff. So if I wanted to make sure that this kind of gets a little more smoothed edge, if I get it wet with water, kind of scrub that a little bit with my brush and then kind of just dab a paper towel on it, that will pull up some of that. So I'm kind of smoothing this out a little bit, and then just right in that center I want to kind of pull up some of that red or some of the pigment that's on there. Just makes it a little bit more smooth and a little bit of an area where if you wanted to, you accidentally covered over, or you want to kind of make that look smooth or pull up some of that. I got some highlights kind of going on in here. On top, I'm going to kind of just add some little bit of water on that. And I got to use my paper towel and kind of soak up some of that pigment a little bit. Just a little bit. There's one little spot up here too. All right. The very last thing I'm going to do is do the leaf and the stem. Kind of a yellowy green kind of color. Again, if you're looking at the stem right here, that stem has a little bit of a yellowy kind of color at the top here. So I'm gonna kind of put yellow over it first. And then I have a brown, but you could also use a purple mixed with yellow to get that kind of brown color. I will actually also I haven't used this brown, but I'm gonna actually mix some purple with it. Because it's so dark, it'll help darken that brown up. I need that stem to be a little darker. Oh, and don't forget your shadow. That shadow is going to be a little bit of a purpley kind of color, and maybe even a touch of yellow to make that kind of neutral. All right, there we go.